Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today on the podcast, I have Dan Englander. Dan, how are you?
I'm well, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Good. Yeah, it's great to have you on. I know we chatted before, and today I want to talk a little bit about scaling that sales process, scaling business. I know you've got a lot of knowledge in that area, and you talk about the idea of relationship in sales, and you have kind of your own philosophy behind it. So let's jump right in, and why don't you tell me about the relationship mindset that you inject into your sales process?
Yeah, for sure. So I think when you hear like relationship sales, it's something that gets thrown around. It's like strategy or any of these other words that kind of like lose their meaning. First, I think it's good to talk about why it matters. And my belief, and it's not just my belief, I think a lot of other people, like what we're observing now, especially like in the agency and B2B service space, is a trust recession, right? There's this idea that like really the thing you're up against isn't lack of differentiation or bells and whistles and features and benefits. It's really that if you are an agency or you are selling something that's perceived as a commoditized, which is honestly lots of software products as well now,
Yeah.
lots of other products, the thing you're up against is lack of trust. So our whole thing is how do you de-risk a conversation, right? How do you de-risk building a relationship? Because whether you're doing outbound or you're doing content or you're doing ads or whatever the medium might be, everything has to start with a conversation and the sales cycle is probably going to take some time. So with that in mind, how can you de-risk these things? Our whole experience has been that the reasons that a lot of busy and skeptical people take meetings and get curious and say, what is this? Is it's because somebody spoke to them as if they are in their tribe, right? They're in their world. If, for example, if you're doing outreach and looking to get meetings with a fintech company, there's so many subtleties that would be different than if you were trying to get a meeting with the CMO of a consumer packaged goods brand, for
Yeah.
example, right? So all these things go into that, and that's kind of what we mean by relationship sales at scale, which is something I get way more into the weeds on that, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, and maybe this takes us into the weeds, but I agree with what you're saying. And I think how I explain it or kind of how I come at it with clients too is that, and again, another overused word, but there's an authenticity that has to be there. And in order to build that relationship, there has to be trust. And you have to kind of meet them where they're at to some degree and understand their pain points, which I think it's hard for people to do in the sales process because you're so busy trying to pitch the stats and the numbers and the metrics and trying to make people believe that hey, you need this, where we're not really asking ourselves the question sometimes is A, do they really need it, but B, where are they at in the process? What pain point or what problem am I trying to really solve?
Yeah, and I think for me in particular, and definitely like a lot of the clients that we take on, and for context, we work with agencies and B2B service companies to help them make outreach work as an effective channel so that they
Yeah.
can scale and so that owners can get out of the sales seat and all that great stuff. But I think a lot of the times, back to your point, the way people go into sales and the way that a lot of people think about it for years is that they are in the business of persuasion, right? They think about it as I'm trying to persuade you to do a certain thing. And there's elements of that. There's elements of presenting an offer the right way. There's elements of clarifying and getting over objections. That's all part of it. But it's really like becoming, and maybe it always was, 80% of more like a sorting function, like more of like you identifying the right person and making sure that they're a fit and figuring that out sooner rather than later so that you don't waste a lot of time, right? Because the only thing that you really have control over is your time. You can't control what people do. You can't control what decisions they make. All you can
Yep.
control is what how long you're going to spend at that particular poker table.
I think for one, just on the comment of time, I think timing is also everything. So what might be a no today might be a yes tomorrow. So knowing kind of how to read that room and kind of how to come at that sales approach from a very consistent standpoint is kind of overlooked sometimes because like you said it's all about persuasion and whether I can convince these people. And I think sometimes in the sales process it's really just about be who you are, meet them where they're at and be consistent with it because like to your point, you the only thing you can control is the time, and in this case it's at bats. So how many at bats can I get before I start to develop a system and a pattern of success?
Yeah, and I think it's important to parse that, right? Because I don't know everybody that's listening, but I think a lot of the times when we're working with clients, they get most of their business from referrals, which are great, very unpredictable, and usually not enough to actually scale and achieve the things that you want to achieve, right? So if you're in that situation, you can go crazy trying to find trends in a very small amount of data, right? And trying to figure out how to optimize your process the right way. I think, but back to your point, kind of like meeting people where they're at. It's not just our numbers and our stats. I think there's a lot of data on this, and you hear a lot of this idea that around half the people that you could talk to, and this is probably going to be more applicable once you actually get to something that scales, like whether you're doing outreach or ads or whatever it might be. Around half of the people are never going to buy from you ever, right? Either because they're just tire kickers or they're a bad fit or whatever. Out of the remaining 50%, there's two different situations. There's one where maybe like a quarter of them, or maybe even like a huge chunk of that remaining 50% will buy from you in 3-6 months. And then there's a very small percentage that are like really great fits right now that are like active opportunities. So a lot of sales is figuring out, what am I dealing with here? Right. And sometimes you might go through a bunch of conversations to figure that out until you get good enough at it. Right.
Yeah, I talk a lot with my clients too about understanding their turn time. And what I mean by that is, when you have that first conversation versus when they actually say, "Hey, I'll work with you." And yeah, I mean, it's not unrealistic for that to be 60 to 90 days. So the only way to kind of build that out is through the consistency, and then start to look at that 60 to 90-day window from a conversion standpoint. Then you'll kind of get a better understanding as to where you're at. Where I think naturally we want to just either live in the moment, or we live in these like 30-day sales cycles, and if we don't get a yes in that, inside of that immediately and or within that 30 days, we chalk it up as a failure. And it's, well, not necessarily, because if you understand your turn time, they might be in the acceptable window of time in which they're still mulling it over. They're still trying to make the decision, in which you can come back and help them and give them more information about what it is you're trying to get them to do.
Right. Right. And of course, like your sales cycle is going to be contextual based on your industry and what you sell and all these sorts of things. But I think a lot of the times what we see is that if clients have never built out a repeatable system, they have these kind of false beliefs about their sales cycles, right? Because they're only seeing people at the tail end. By the time you get a referral, somebody is both problem and solution aware, right? They might not know everything, but they know generally what they need to solve their problem. So your sales cycle, if that's you, your sales cycle is actually much longer than you think it is. You're just seeing the end of it. So that's important. That's like an expectation that we set with clients. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I'm a client, maybe I'm a company or a client that's only really ever operated from that referral standpoint. I don't have a good handle on my sales cycle. What's the first step? If I come to you and say, "Dan, here's where I'm at, and I think I know what I know, but I'm not sure." How do you kind of take them through the process, or what's the first step to kind of get that going in the
Yeah.
right direction?
The first step is clarity, always. I mean, the first step is figuring out what problem are we solving and who are we solving it for, which is blocking and tackling. I'm sure you do a lot of that with your clients yourself. That's the foundation for everything else. I think what happens is if people do this too quickly, or they're not really focused on doing it the right way, they go buy a piece of software, or they go jump down some tactical rabbit hole, and then they end up in a worse place. That's really the first thing: is who are we serving, what problem are we solving, et cetera. And I don't mean just from a high level, like literally what companies. Build the list of companies that you can work with. And that's easy to do. It's not expensive. There are methodologies. We teach a lot of them for getting the data and all this stuff. But that's really important, as well as the individual people. I think that creates a lot of hand wringing for a lot of people, because there's a lot of situations where people do this one thing for one group of people and another for another. Pick the one that you think is best, and go from there. If it doesn't work, then go back to a different one. Sometimes we even recommend doing experiments to a few. But regardless, that's step one. Step two is who. Like, who's going to be running these efforts? For us, we're all about outreach. We tend to do well when our clients are in selling up market. But I don't know who's listening. That may or may not be you. But regardless of whether you're doing outreach, like in our case, or you're doing ads or whatever, you need to figure out who's leading the effort, who's contributing to it, and literally block off time for it, count the costs, and go from there. So yeah, that's typically how we're getting started with people.
Would you agree that whether they're working with a service like yours, whether they're running paid ads, whether they're doing something a little more organic and grassroots, would you agree that it all kind of starts and ends with clarity on what you're shooting for?
Yeah, and absolutely, and it will always be somewhat of a moving target, but our whole philosophy is figure out that moving target by actually having like real conversations in your market, as opposed to what a lot of people do, which is like they'll have two calls with existing clients that will give them random feedback, and then they'll say, let's redo our site, let's spend the next 6 months redoing our website, right? And before they even get out there and get enough data to inform something as important as a website, right? So our whole thing is if you screw up outbound, it's not good. Like you should try to get it right, but it's not as bad as screwing up something like a website or your deck or whatever. Like outbound in our experience is like 70% sales and closing deals, 30% learning and getting better at everything else. Yeah.
I was just going to say that sometimes you don't know what you don't know till you do it. And then you find out that, oh man, I wish I would have had this, or I wish I would have done this differently. But you also can't get there unless you try it. So
Yeah.
I do think you should be well thought and you should be intentional with your efforts, but sometimes you just got to get out there too.
Sure. Absolutely.
So again, if I'm a client that's looking to start something like this, what are the milk, eggs, and bread of what I need to have in place to do it effectively?
Yeah, great question. So the first building block is people and time, right? We talked to a lot of people and a lot of agency owners, especially, and they're like, I want to grow, I want to achieve this. And my first question is, why do you want that? What's behind it? Because growth and these things take pain and sacrifice and time, right? So that's the first thing is this has to be important. An ideal goal for a client of ours is I want to build a repeatable new business system so that I can graduate to bigger and better things, whatever they may be. We don't work with people that are like, I want to scrape up a few leads. I want to randomly hit this revenue goal that I haven't really thought about at all. So that's the most important thing. And then from there, it really, the cool thing about outbound, it does take time, but you don't need a giant team to do it. What we usually recommend is an owner or somebody that is ready to be in the sales seat. That's often an owner. Sometimes it's the head of new business. And then somebody that can help them. This is usually kind of like a research role. It could be a part-time sales and marketing function. It could be somebody that is hired online, like a contractor, to help out with building lists and sort of like the machinery of this. And those are the two main building blocks. There's some software, and then a lot of it is just going about it the right way. It's having attention to detail. It's not going in cold. Our whole methodology is looking at areas where our clients can contact prospects who already are likely to trust them, right? Through commonalities and that kind of thing. And then just having the right expectations about KPIs and meeting volumes and sort of staying ahead of that. Yeah.
How often do you find that clients are looking for, I mean, obviously they're looking for leads and opportunities, but how often do you find that they're looking for, like, I need you to get me out of a jam because we need clients, versus those who are just seeking stability?
Yeah, great question. I would say that the latter happened a lot more in the early years of the company, where we would take people that were, yeah, trying to get out of a jam, trying to hit some crazy revenue goal in a short amount of time because they're hemorrhaging money, whatever it is, the silver bullet seekers and everything. We've just gotten better at sussing that out over time and going for that. And I think what happens is it's almost, I don't want to use like too dramatic of a metaphor, but it's almost like hitting rock bottom with drugs or alcohol or something. Like you go through enough of those clients and you're like, this, I'm never doing this again. Like,
Right.
yeah. So now like we a lot of what we do now is actually training based and helping teams do this in-house. And that's where we're moving as a company. But when we do this for people, we're very selective and very careful, and we want to make sure that the goal is building a repeatable system, that the expectation is you're going to be building relationships. These sales cycles are going to take time. And really, like, it's work, it takes time, but the rewards are really worth it, right? Because if you can figure out that repeatable system, which is something we've seen dozens and dozens of clients do over the years, then you can build an organization that can either scale, that you can step away from, that you can sell. And it's really the only way. Like, we talk to people that buy and sell agencies and other businesses. We talk to agency owners that have pulled it off, and it's the most necessary ingredient. It's if you wanted to bake a cake and you didn't have milk or eggs, like you have to have that basically.
Yeah. I think it's important to note there just that anytime you're building out a sales process like this, or whether it's highly sophisticated, it's organic, whatever, there's nothing about it that's guaranteed. There's predictabilities that are generated based off of patterns and consistencies that you then put into your strategy and your plan, and you kind of know what works because you've done it enough times. And there's a lot of confidence and stability that can be found in that. However, it is important to note, like, nobody can guarantee anything because it's a moving landscape. But I think to get in that game and to be good at it, you got to start today, and you have to be willing to kind of roll with the punches and understand it's a learning process. It's not, I think sometimes we look at successful people and we think, oh, they must have the secret sauce. They must know the answers. Well, I mean, sort of. They know how to get the answers. That doesn't mean they have it at the ready, though. They've just found a way to figure it out. They found a way to kind of extract what works for them and keep layering and evolving on top of it. So that said, what are your thoughts on that, and how can people find you and find more information about sales schema and about Dan?
Yeah, totally. To kind of address the point you made, I think that's definitely true. Like, what we try to do and what our best clients have done, the people that have built ginormous organizations, or even the ones that haven't but have achieved everything that they've wanted and have been able to build this repeatable system. I think one thing that makes them different is they're kind of like tinkerers. They're kind of like scientists. They have fun looking at where the bottleneck might actually live. They have fun trying to understand their businesses as they actually are versus what they wish they could be. So if there's a bottleneck, like to give an example, if we're getting leads and they're not closing, then they're like, okay, this is a mid-funnel issue. I need to figure out how to take these people and move them along. Versus others that haven't figured that out yet and are in a jam. We should have closed business by now.
Sure.
A lot of it's kind of ownership and accountability. I really appreciate you having me. I think the best place to find me is saleschema.com. We have a video training on there on the homepage that is going to show you how we do a lot of this stuff. It goes through our cadence. It goes through email copy examples. If you are a B2B organization selling up market, I think you'll find a lot of value there. So I really appreciate it, Mike.
Yeah, I just one little last plug for you. I think it's important for people to reach out and just have a conversation. This is a big animal. It's a fairly complex topic for those who are not used to it. And I think just having a quick conversation with Dan would get you some answers that you need as to whether or not you're ready or you're not. So anyway, thanks for being on, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again. Yeah, I appreciate it.
If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and or the brand Retro Mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.